You never forget the sound of a loyal dog's last bark. It's the kind of sound that doesn't just echo, it stays with you. This is the story of Rex, a German shepherd who did something most people wouldn't have the courage to do. He took a bullet to save the little girl he loved. And in that moment, he reminded an entire town what real loyalty means. But here's the thing. This isn't just about one brave dog. It's about us. About how, somewhere along the way, we started taking unconditional love for granted. The kind of love that waits by the door, that forgives you no matter how bad your day's been. I've spent years studying and sharing stories of human-animal connection. How dogs like Rex don't just change lives, they heal them. And today, I want to show you something deeper than a headline or a viral post. Because if you've ever loved a dog, truly loved one, this story will make you see that bond in a whole new light. Stay with me to the end. Because what happens next will remind you exactly why dogs are called man's best friend. The sun rose slow and golden over the quiet hills of Georgia, painting the town in soft amber light. Dew still clung to the wild grass, and the only sound breaking the still morning air was the steady hum of cicadas. In this corner of the world, mornings came gently, like a whispered promise that life, no matter how fragile, would keep moving forward. At the end of a narrow dirt road stood a white farmhouse, its paint faded by years of summer heat and southern rain. Inside, the faint smell of coffee and maple syrup drifted through the kitchen. A girl sat at the table by the window, tracing sunlight on the rim of her mug. Emily Carter, 14 years old, her legs bound to a chair she could not leave without help. But her eyes, clear, blue, unyielding, carried a quiet strength that spoke louder than any words. At her feet rested a German shepherd, Rex, his coat gleaming like burnt honey under the morning light. He watched her with that unwavering canine devotion, head tilted slightly as if he could read her every thought. When Emily smiled, Rex's tail thumped softly against the floor. When she sighed, he lifted his head and nudged her knee, sensing emotions that even her parents sometimes missed. Their mornings were a ritual, almost sacred. Emily would hum a tune, something between a lullaby and a prayer, as she brushed Rex's fur with long, gentle strokes. The sound of the bristles against his coat blended with the morning breeze that fluttered the curtains. "You ready, partner?" she whispered, holding up her worn leather backpack. Rex perked up immediately, trotting to the door, tail wagging in rhythm. He knew exactly what came next. The straps of the backpack were a challenge he'd mastered long ago. Gripping the handle carefully in his teeth, he lifted it onto her lap before nudging her wheelchair forward with his shoulder. Emily laughed, a soft, melodic sound that filled the quiet house. "Thanks, big guy. I don't know what I'd do without you." If a dog could smile, Rex just did. From the porch, Emily's father, tall, broad-shouldered, with the posture of a man who'd once lived in a world where every second counted, watched them. His uniform from years of service now replaced by flannel and work boots. He didn't say much, but his eyes softened as he saw his daughter glide down the ramp with Rex walking faithfully beside her. "You two look ready to take on the world," he said, his voice warm but tinged with pride, and something else, worry. Emily adjusted her backpack and grinned. "Just school, Dad. Not the world." He chuckled and handed her lunchbox over. "Same thing these days." Outside, the yellow school bus rumbled in the distance, its brakes squealing as it turned onto their road. Dust rose behind it like a pale cloud. Rex barked once, not out of fear, but excitement. He loved watching the world move, loved being part of Emily's little universe. The bus driver, Mrs. Jenkins, an elderly woman with soft eyes and years of laughter lines, waved as the doors hissed open. "Mornin', sugar. And mornin' to you too, Rex." Rex wagged his tail politely. The lift whirred as Emily rolled her chair up, Rex climbing in beside her. He always rode the bus, always sat right next to her seat like a silent guardian. The other students were used to it now. Rex had become part of their school's heartbeat. As the bus rolled down the winding road, sunlight flickered through the trees, golden flashes across the windows. Laughter bubbled up from the back seats. A boy tossed a paper plane. Someone started singing out of tune. It felt like any other morning in any other small town. Emily looked out the window, her reflection mingling with the passing landscape. Farms, barns, weathered fences. The world seemed so safe from inside that moving shell of yellow metal. So ordinary, so untouched. Until the bus turned a corner. The chatter dimmed as they passed the sheriff's house. It sat on a small hill, Hamul, proud and isolated. The white paint gleamed too bright, the lawn trimmed too neat, a picture of order. But something about it felt wrong, too still, too silent. On the porch sat Kyle, the sheriff's son. His elbows rested on his knees, his eyes fixed somewhere far beyond the horizon. The morning sun caught on the chain around his wrist, maybe a watch, maybe something else. And for a brief second, Emily met his gaze through the bus window. There was something hollow in it, something that made the world tilt just slightly off balance. Rex growled, low and uncertain, and Emily's hand instinctively found his collar. "Hey, easy," she whispered, but her own heartbeat had quickened. Kyle didn't move. He just watched the bus go by, his face expressionless, his eyes dark with something she couldn't name. The moment passed. The bus rattled on, leaving behind the house, the boy, and the strange weight that clung to the air. But the silence that followed wasn't peaceful anymore. It carried a faint hum, the kind of stillness that comes before a storm, before the sky splits open. Emily exhaled slowly, trying to shake the unease. Rex pressed his head gently against her shoulder, as if to say, "I'm here." She smiled faintly and ran her fingers through his fur. By the time they reached the school, laughter had returned to the bus, and the world seemed bright again. But somewhere deep inside her chest, a small knot remained, a quiet, unspoken tension she couldn't quite explain. And outside, beyond the fields, a lone crow called from the top of a pine tree, its cry echoing against the morning sky. Rex's ears twitched. His eyes followed the sound. The air was still, too still. The day had only just begun. The school bell rang, and the sound spilled down the hallway like sunlight. Bright, harmless, familiar. Lockers clanged open and shut. Shoes squeaked against the polished floor. A faint scent of pencil shavings, paper, and cafeteria pancakes hung in the air. It was an ordinary morning in an ordinary town, the kind of morning that felt like it would go on forever. Emily Carter's wheelchair hummed quietly as she rolled down the hall, Rex padding loyally beside her. Students waved, smiled, and stepped aside to make room, not out of pity, but respect. Rex had earned that for both of them. "Morning, Em!" "Hey, Rex!" The German shepherd's ears flicked, tail swishing in calm acknowledgement. He was as much a part of the school as the morning announcements or the smell of chalk dust. Teachers loved him. Students adored him. There was something grounding about his presence, like he soaked up all the chaos of teenage life and turned it into calm. In homeroom, Emily parked her wheelchair near the window, where sunlight filtered in through green-tinted glass. Rex settled beside her, head resting neatly on his paws. When the teacher, Mrs. Parker, called attendance, Rex raised his head, as if he too was part of the roll call. The class laughed softly, and Emily smiled, patting his neck. "Still the best listener in the room," Mrs. Parker said warmly, glancing at Rex before writing the date on the board. September 9th, 2024. Outside, a breeze fluttered through the open window. Everything seemed peaceful, too peaceful, almost. Across the room, sitting in the far corner, Kyle Thompson slouched low in his chair, eyes hidden beneath his dark hoodie. His pencil moved fast, scratching against paper with restless energy. His desk was a fortress. Books stacked high, papers crumpled, a faint circle of pencil marks worn into the wood where his hand had lingered too long. He wasn't looking at anyone, but everyone looked at him. There was something about Kyle that drew attention, and not the good kind. He was the sheriff's son, the boy who used to run track, the boy who used to laugh. But somewhere between last year and now, something had changed. The laughter had drained out of him, replaced by silence and stares. Rumors had filled the space instead, whispers about fights at home, about a father who was too strict, about a boy who'd stopped caring. When the bell rang for the next period, the class filed out in pairs and groups. Kyle stayed seated. He was sketching something in the corner of his notebook. Dark, messy lines forming shapes that were almost faces, but not quite. Rex's ears twitched. The faint smell of sweat and metal made him lift his head. Emily lingered at the door, watching. There was a flicker of memory. Last spring, when Kyle had dropped his books in the hallway and no one helped him. No one but her. She had wheeled over, picked up his notebook, and smiled. "You okay?" she'd asked then, and he'd looked startled, like he'd forgotten people could be kind. Now, months later, she found herself asking again, same voice, same question. "Kyle, are you okay?" His pencil froze. For a long moment he didn't move. Then he looked up. His eyes were hollow. Not angry. Just empty, like someone had taken something from him and never given it back. "I'm fine," he said, barely a whisper. Then he tore the page out of his notebook, crumpled it, and shoved it deep into his bag. Emily hesitated. Rex shifted closer, his tail brushing her wheel. Something about the air between them felt heavy, electric, tense, as if the world was holding its breath. But before she could say anything else, Kyle stood abruptly, slung his backpack over one shoulder, and brushed past her toward the door. The hallway outside was already filling with noise again. Students laughed. Lockers slammed. Sneakers squealed on the floor. Normalcy swallowed the moment whole. Rex let out a soft whine, watching Kyle disappear around the corner. Emily placed a hand on his head. "It's okay," she murmured, though her voice didn't sound convinced. In the cafeteria later that morning, life resumed its usual rhythm. A pop song hummed faintly from someone's phone. The clatter of trays and the smell of mashed potatoes filled the air. Emily sat with a few friends, talking about an upcoming math test, but her mind kept drifting back to Kyle, to his quietness, to the way he hadn't looked at her. Not really. At the far end of the cafeteria, Kyle sat alone. No one joined him. He ate slowly, mechanically, like someone following instructions. Every few seconds, he glanced toward the window, his reflection ghosted in the glass. His hands trembled slightly when he reached for his drink. When Emily's gaze met his, just for an instant, he looked away. By afternoon, the sun had climbed high, turning the halls golden. Rex lay beside Emily's desk in English class, half asleep, the rhythmic tapping of pencils a lullaby. The teacher droned on about themes of guilt and redemption in the scarlet letter. Emily stared out the window again. The world outside too bright, too innocent. The clock ticked toward 3 p.m., the day almost done. And then, a whisper of unease again. As students packed up their bags, Rex stirred, his nose lifted, his body tensed just slightly. Emily frowned, following his gaze, across the hall, where Kyle stood in front of his locker. The other kids flowed around, him like a river around a rock, not seeing him, not hearing him. He opened the locker door slowly. For a split second, Emily caught a glimpse, something glinting inside, metallic, cold. The locker shut with a soft, final click. Kyle turned, eyes distant, face blank. He walked down the hallway, disappearing into the crowd. Rex's low growl rumbled in his chest. Emily's heart skipped. The noise of the school faded, laughter, footsteps, chatter, until all that was left was the faint hum of fluorescent lights and the whisper of something unseen building beneath the surface. Outside, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the hallway floor, stretching toward the locker that now stood still and silent. The same kind of silence that comes right before thunder. And somewhere deep inside, Rex knew the peace of this place was running out. Lunch hour. The air inside the cafeteria buzzed with chatter, laughter, and the clatter of trays, a symphony of everyday life. Teenagers talked over one another, a dozen conversations folding into the same familiar noise that filled every school cafeteria in America. The fluorescent lights flickered above. The hum of vending machines blended with the squeak of shoes against tile. Emily Carter sat near the window, her wheelchair pulled up to the same table she always shared with two friends. Rex lay at her side, half asleep, his head resting between his paws. The smell of fries and ketchup hung thick in the air. For a fleeting second, it was perfect. Ordinary, safe, real. Emily was laughing at something her friend said, shaking her head, when it happened. A sound, sharp, metallic, and wrong, split through the noise. Bang! The entire room froze. For one heartbeat, no one moved. Laughter hung unfinished in the air. Then came the second shot, louder, closer. Bang! Trays crashed to the floor. Screams ripped through the stillness. The world tilted. Emily's first instinct wasn't fear, it was confusion. Her mind couldn't process what she was hearing. But Rex knew. He was already on his feet, hackles raised, ears pinned forward. His growl came low, deep, primal. "Rex!" Emily whispered, voice trembling. Before she could react, the room exploded into chaos. Chairs toppled, students ran in every direction. A teacher shouted, "Go! Get down!" But his voice was swallowed by panic. Rex lunged toward Emily's wheelchair and with surprising strength pushed it backward. His body pressed against the side, guiding her behind a cafeteria table. Metal screeched against tile. The noise, the screams, Everything blurred into a distorted, echoing nightmare. The air filled with the acrid scent of gunpowder. The sound of shattering glass tore through the room. Someone shouted a name, then silence, then another gunshot. Emily's hands shook violently as she clutched the arms of her chair. Her heart pounded against her ribs. She could taste fear, metallic, dry, and suffocating. Rex barked, not out of fear, but defiance. Then she saw him. Through the smoke and chaos, Kyle stepped into view. His black hoodie, the same one from class, hung loose around him. His face was pale, too pale, and his eyes were somewhere else entirely. Not focused, not wild, just empty. He moved forward slowly, almost methodically, reloading the weapon with mechanical precision. Students were crawling, running, sobbing. Some hid under tables, others pressed against walls, hands over their heads. A teacher dragged a bleeding boy toward the door. The fire alarm screamed overhead, red lights flashing in strobe bursts. Emily froze, trapped between instinct and disbelief. She knew that face. She knew that boy. Kyle's hand trembled slightly as he raised the gun again. "Please," someone shouted, but the word was swallowed by another crack of gunfire. Bang! Emily flinched. The table beside her splintered. Rex growled louder, stepping forward to shield her body. His muscles were taut, ready to spring. Emily's breath came in short, ragged bursts. "No, no, stay, Rex!" But he wouldn't. The world slowed, everything stretching into a silent blur. The sound of her heartbeat drowned everything else. The smell of blood and smoke mixed with cafeteria grease. The flashing alarm turned the room into a horror film of red and shadow. And then, their eyes met. Kyle saw her. For a second that lasted forever, time stood still. He hesitated. His jaw clenched. His eyes flickered. Recognition. Confusion. Pain. Emily's lips parted. The same words she'd once said echoing in her mind. "Are you okay?" But this time the question caught in her throat. Rex barked again, sharp, fierce, a challenge that cut through the noise. He positioned himself fully in front of her wheelchair, body shaking with tension. "Kyle," Emily whispered, tears stinging her eyes. "Please don't." The look in his eyes changed. Not hate, not anger, just emptiness. He raised the gun. Rex moved first. He lunged forward, a blur of tan and black, the snarl erupting from his chest like thunder. Emily screamed, reaching for him, but the sound was lost in the explosion that followed. Bang! The bullet struck metal, then flesh. Emily's vision fractured, her ears ringing, her heart pounding so hard it hurt. Rex collapsed beside her, his body twitching, blood spreading fast beneath him. His breathing came in short, sharp gasps. "No, no, no, no," Emily sobbed, her hands trembling as she reached for him. "Rex, please stay with me." The chaos blurred into a haze, people running, police shouting from the hallway, someone calling her name. But all Emily could see was Rex. "My time... Blow." His eyes, still open, locked on hers. His tail gave one small thump against the floor, as if to say, "It's okay." Kyle's gun lowered. His hands shook violently now. The weapon slipped from his grasp, clattering against the tile. For a brief, broken moment, his expression changed. Shock, horror, guilt. Before the police burst through the doors, shouting commands. "Drop it! Drop it now!" He didn't move. Emily pressed her hands against Rex's wound, her tears dripping into his fur. The sound of sirens screamed in the distance. The metallic tang of blood filled her nose. The last thing she remembered before everything went dark was Rex's chest rising one last time. Slow, deliberate. And the faint brush of his nose against her palm. Then stillness, silence. And in that silence, Emily's world shattered. The world fractured into silence. The gunshot still echoed somewhere in the distance, yet everything around Emily slowed. The screams, the sirens, the chaos, all drowned beneath a heavy, muffled heartbeat that wasn't hers. Rex lay across her lap, his weight crushing but comforting, his fur warm and wet beneath her shaking hands. Blood, thick, dark, alive, seeped between her fingers, staining her sleeves, dripping onto the cold cafeteria floor. "Rex! No, no, no!" Emily's voice broke, a raw whisper tangled in tears. She tried to lift him, but her trembling arms couldn't move his body. His breathing came in ragged bursts, shallow and desperate. His eyes, usually sharp and full of mischief, now clouded with pain, yet still searching, still protecting. Around her, the cafeteria was unrecognizable. Overturned tables, shattered glass, abandoned shoes. The fire alarm blared its relentless cry, red lights pulsing across the walls like a heartbeat gone mad. The smell of gunpowder and fear hung thick in the air. Then, movement. Kyle stood frozen in the middle of it all, gun limp in his hand, his face pale as chalk. His lips moved, forming words no one could hear. His eyes weren't those of a monster. They were the eyes of a boy who'd suddenly realized what he'd done. "Get down!" a police officer shouted as they stormed in, guns raised. "Kyle Thompson!" another yelled. "Drop it, now!" For a moment, Kyle didn't react. He just stared at the floor, the gun dangling loosely from his fingers. Then, slowly, like waking from a dream, he let it fall. The clatter of metal on tile echoed like thunder in the suffocating silence that followed. Emily's vision blurred, her body trembling uncontrollably as adrenaline crashed into grief. She could hear her heartbeat pounding in her ears. Her entire world had narrowed to the patch of fur beneath her hands, the rise and fall of Rex's chest. "You saved me," she whispered, her tears falling onto his muzzle. "You stupid, brave boy." Rex's ear twitched, barely. His paw shifted slightly, pressing weakly against her knee. It wasn't a movement of pain, it was reassurance. Even now, he was telling her to stay calm, to hold on. "Stay with me," she pleaded. "Please." A pair of officers approached, their boots splashing through spilled drinks and shattered glass. One crouched near her. "We need to move you, sweetheart," he said gently. His voice trembled, his eyes darting to Rex's wound. "No!" Emily cried, clutching Rex tighter. "Don't take him! He's hurt! He's hurt!" "Ma'am," another officer said quietly, "we've got a vet en route. He's going with us." A paramedic pushed through the crowd, her gloved hands already slick with blood. "We'll take care of him," she promised. But even she hesitated when she saw the dog's eyes, the way they refused to leave Emily's face. As the paramedics worked, lifting Rex carefully onto a stretcher, Emily's world tilted. She could barely breathe. The room around her seemed to spin. Flashes of color and sound, fragments of voices. "4 injured! Shooter in custody! Get the children outside!" but all she heard was the faint whimper from Rex as they hoisted him up. His head lolled to the side, eyes half closed, but still fixed on her. Still watching. Still protecting. Emily reached out a trembling hand, brushing her fingers through his fur as the stretcher rolled past. "Don't you leave me too," she whispered, her voice breaking. Rex's tail twitched once, barely perceptible, as if he understood. Police lights flashed through the shattered windows, casting streaks of blue and red across the cafeteria walls. Outside, sirens wailed, parents screamed names, and the air vibrated with grief and disbelief. But Emily heard none of it. Her body felt weightless as officers wheeled her chair toward the exit. The floor beneath her was slick with spilled milk and blood. Somewhere, a phone rang endlessly. Somewhere else, a teacher sobbed into her hands. Kyle was being led out in handcuffs. His face was blank, his eyes red-rimmed. When he passed Emily, he hesitated. Their eyes met for the second time that day. The first filled with shock, the second with unbearable remorse. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. And maybe none ever could. The officers pushed him forward. Emily turned her gaze back toward the stretcher, the small patch of tan and black fur disappearing into the flashing chaos outside. The ambulance doors opened with a metallic thud. A voice shouted for plasma. Another shouted for oxygen. The noise blurred again, sirens morphing into a dull roar that faded into her pulse. Her hands were still shaking, streaked with crimson. When she looked down, she saw a single paw print pressed faintly against her sleeve, his blood marking her like a promise. He saved me. The world outside was blinding, a sea of flashing lights, sobbing faces, and frantic movement. Cameras already pointed. Reporters shouted questions. How many victims? Who's the shooter? Was the sheriff's son involved? But Emily didn't hear any of it. All she saw was Rex, his stretcher lifted into the back of the ambulance. His eyes flickered open one last time, searching for her. When they found her, his body stilled, their gaze held, fragile, sacred, unbreakable. "I'm right here," she whispered, voice trembling through tears. "I'm right here, boy." The ambulance doors closed. The sirens wailed again, growing distant, until all that remained was the echo of tires on gravel and the ghost of a bark that lingered in the air, soft, defiant, loyal to the end. Emily sat frozen as the noise of the world returned in waves. Hands rested on her shoulders. Teachers, officers, strangers, but none of it mattered. She could still feel the warmth of Rex's fur on her palms, still see his eyes. Her father's voice broke through the chaos, shouting her name. He ran toward her, collapsing beside the wheelchair, pulling her into his arms. She sobbed against his chest, words tumbling out in broken gasps. "He saved me, Dad. He saved me." Her father closed his eyes, holding her tighter, as if to shield her from everything that had already happened. But nothing could stop the memory of that sound, the crack of the gun, the fall of her best friend, the silence that followed. Nothing could ever stop it. The world returned in fragments, a steady beeping, the scent of antiseptic, the faint hum of fluorescent lights above. Emily Carter drifted somewhere between sleep and memory, her mind replaying the same scene in endless broken flashes. Rex's bark, the gunshot, the way his body had fallen across her. When her eyes opened, The ceiling was white and unfamiliar. For a moment, she thought she was dreaming. Then the pain returned, not sharp, but deep, aching, alive. A hospital room, a soft blanket tucked around her, a bandage along her arm where shards of glass had cut through skin. Her father was there, head bowed in a chair beside her bed. His uniform cap rested on his knee, hands clasped so tightly his knuckles were white. He looked older now, the weight of fear carving new lines into his face. "Dad?" Her voice came out small, hoarse. He lifted his head instantly, eyes glassy. He leaned forward, brushing her hair back. "Hey, sweetheart. You're okay. You're safe now." Her throat tightened. "Rex." The name broke her voice in two. Her father hesitated. "He's alive," he said finally. "Barely. They've got him in surgery. He lost a lot of blood." She turned her face away, tears gathering before she could stop them. "He saved me, Dad. He—" "I know." His voice cracked. He swallowed hard, forcing composure. He did what a soldier would do. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The only sound was the rhythmic pulse of the heart monitor, a cruel reminder that she was breathing because someone else almost wasn't. Outside, chaos waited. The hospital was surrounded by flashing cameras, reporters pushing microphones toward Talmun, anyone in uniform. Why did this happen? Wasn't the shooter the sheriff's son? Where were the police? Inside, officers moved like shadows through the corridors. Their conversations hushed, their faces grim. By noon, the sheriff himself stood before the press, a wall of cameras and flashing bulbs aimed at his polished badge and hollow expression. His voice, steady and rehearsed, echoed through every TV in town. "Our hearts go out to the victims and their families. The investigation is ongoing. Please keep our community in your prayers." To the public, he was the grieving father of a troubled boy, a man of law standing firm in tragedy. But behind the cameras, whispers moved like wildfire through the ranks. Talk of sealed reports, erased security footage, and quiet warnings from superiors. "Keep your mouth shut," one officer muttered to another as they left the briefing. "You didn't see anything you weren't supposed to." "Are they really?" "Yes. Orders came from the top. This doesn't go public." But not everyone stayed silent. In the waiting room, Emily's father, James Carter, former Army medic, a man who'd seen corruption on foreign soil, recognized the signs of deceit immediately. He'd spent a lifetime reading faces, the nervous glances between officers, the half-finished sentences, the way the sheriff avoided his eyes when they passed in the hall. It was all too familiar. By evening, he stood outside Emily's room, talking quietly with a nurse he trusted. "Has anyone asked to see the girl yet? Statements, questions?" The nurse shook her head. "No one. They said to let her rest." He frowned. Rest? After a shooting like that, they'd be swarming her with detectives. Unless... He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. The nurse's silence said enough. Inside, Emily stared at the muted TV on the wall. The sheriff's face filled the screen again. His voice calm, practiced. "We will not let this tragedy define us," he said. "Justice will be served." Emily turned away. The word justice no longer felt safe. Later that night, after the hospital had quieted, a nurse appeared at the door. "Miss Carter," she whispered. "He's awake. The dog." They said you could see him now. Emily's heart leapt and broke at the same time. Her father helped her into the wheelchair, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders before pushing her down the sterile corridor. The smell of disinfectant grew stronger with each turn. When they entered the recovery room, the sight hit her like a physical blow. Rex lay on a steel table covered with white linen, his body threaded with tubes and stitches. His chest rose and fell with shallow, uneven breaths. His once glossy fur was shaved in patches where surgeons had worked to stop the bleeding. His front leg was wrapped thick in bandages. He looked small now, fragile, yet his ears twitched at the sound of her voice. "Hey, boy," she whispered, rolling closer. "It's me." His head turned slightly. His eyes opened, unfocused at first, then clear. Recognition flickered there, faint, but real. His tail moved once, a soft, slow thump. "Oh, Rex." Her hands trembled as she reached out to stroke his head, careful not to touch the stitches. "You did it, didn't you? You saved me." Her voice cracked, and the tears came, hot and uncontrollable. She lowered her head onto his shoulder, her fingers digging into his fur. "I'm sorry. I should have stopped him. I should have." Her father's hand rested on her shoulder, steady and quiet. "You couldn't have," he said softly. "He made a choice. Rex made his too." Rex tried to lift his head, just a little, as if responding to his name. "Time bought hunters." His muscles trembled, his breath catching with pain. But still, he tried. Because that's what loyalty looks like. Not perfection, but persistence. Emily wiped her face, forcing a smile through her tears. "Rest, okay? You've done enough for me. Just rest." The room was silent except for the slow rhythm of machines, the steady pulse of life that refused to let go. Outside, beyond the hospital walls, the world argued and speculated, chasing headlines. But inside that quiet recovery room, there were no reporters, no lies, no politics. Only a girl and her dog, two survivors bound by something words could never fully capture. She leaned closer, her voice barely a whisper now. "You're my hero, Rex. My brave, stupid, beautiful hero." Rex's breathing steadied for a moment, his eyes closing as if soothed by her voice. And for the first time since that terrible day, Emily felt the faintest flicker of peace. Fragile, trembling, but real. The hospital cafeteria had grown eerily quiet. It was one of those silences that didn't belong in a place meant for healing. Heavy, uncomfortable, filled with the things people didn't say. The morning sun pressed against the windows, turning the linoleum floors into a cold, reflective mirror of the lives it held inside. In a private room down the hall, Sheriff Daniel Thompson sat at a small table, his uniform jacket folded neatly on the chair beside him. His face, once the portrait of small-town authority, now looked worn. Eyes bloodshot, skin pale beneath the weight of too many sleepless nights. The man who'd once represented law and justice now looked like someone hiding from both. Across from him sat Mrs. Alvarez, mother of one of the fallen students. Her daughter, 16, a cheerleader with a smile that could have lit up the entire football field. Now that smile existed only in the framed photo she held in her shaking hands. "I'm truly sorry for your loss," the sheriff began, voice low, measured, and rehearsed. "I can't imagine your pain. My office wants to help, to cover the costs, and ensure your family is supported. He slid an envelope across the table. It was thick, too thick. Mrs. Alvarez stared at it. Her eyes flicked between the envelope and the man sitting before her, the man whose son had destroyed everything she loved. "You think money makes this better?" Her voice cracked, but didn't waver. "You think I can bury my child and forget because you write a check?" The sheriff's jaw tightened. "That's not what I'm saying. This is to what?" she snapped. "To make me quiet?" The air in the room turned sharp. The sheriff's composure faltered. "Please, Mrs. Alvarez, my son, he didn't mean for—" Her hands trembled as she picked up the envelope, stared at it for a long moment, then tore it in half. The sound of paper ripping sliced through the silence like a blade. "My daughter's life isn't for sale!" she shouted, her voice echoing down the sterile hallway. For a brief second, the mask of authority slipped from Daniel's face. His eyes filled with something raw. Not pity, not remorse, but panic. The kind of fear that comes when a carefully built wall begins to crack. He reached out, voice breaking. "Please." But she was already gone, the shredded pieces of the envelope falling like snow around his boots. He sat there for a long time after, staring at the torn bills spilling from the envelope's remains. His hands trembled as he gathered them up, stuffing them back inside as if that might somehow erase what had just happened. Down the hall, Emily sat quietly in Rex's recovery room, her fingers tracing lazy circles in his fur. The stitches along his side had begun to heal, but his breathing was still uneven, his eyes half-lidded with exhaustion. The door was open, just a crack, enough for her to see the sheriff walking past, with two men in plain clothes. His shoulders were hunched, his expression tight. Rex's head lifted instantly, his nostrils flared, then came the growl. Low, deep, primal, the kind that didn't need translation. Emily looked down, startled. "Rex, hey, it's okay." But it wasn't. The moment the sheriff drew near, Rex's entire body stiffened, his lips curled, teeth glinting under the hospital light. The nurse at the door froze. "Whoa, he's never done that before." Emily's father, James, appeared from the hallway, drawn by the commotion. "What's going on?" Rex's growl deepened as the sheriff's shadow passed by the glass panel of the door. His eyes, those golden, honest eyes, locked on the man's reflection with unmistakable fury. "Easy, boy," James murmured, crouching beside him. "Easy." But Rex wasn't reacting out of confusion. It was something else, something instinctive. He knew. Dogs could smell fear. They could sense anger, but they could also sense guilt. It rolled off the sheriff like gasoline in the air. When the man turned slightly toward the sound, Rex lunged forward against the edge of the table, barking so violently that the nurse screamed. The sheriff stopped, just for a second, and met Rex's eyes through the glass. For the first time in weeks, Daniel Thompson's facade cracked completely. His face went pale. Then, without a word, he turned and walked away. Rex's barking faded into low, broken whines, his energy spent. Emily stroked his head, whispering, "Shh, it's okay. He's gone." But in her chest, she felt something tighten. She didn't know why, but she trusted Rex's instincts more than anyone else's words. That night, the hospital lights dimmed to a dull amber glow. Outside, rain drizzled softly against the windows, streaking the glass with silver. Emily couldn't sleep. The whispers from the hallway, reporters arguing, nurses murmuring, all melted into a strange hum that wouldn't leave her alone. Her father sat by the window, a phone in his hand. He'd been quiet for hours, staring into the darkness like a man who'd already pieced the truth together, and hated it. Finally, he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper, but the weight of it filled the room. "They're not investigating, Em." She blinked. "What?" "Times 600, Mopone." He turned toward her, eyes heavy. "The sheriff's people. They're closing the case before it even starts. They're calling it mental instability. No deeper review, no accountability." Her throat went dry. "But, Kyle..." "I know," he said softly, "and his father's making sure it ends there." Rex stirred beside her, restless even in sleep. Emily reached out to calm him, but her father's next words froze her hand midair. "Justice won't come," he said quietly, staring out at the rain. "Not here. Not anymore." The words hung in the air like smoke, heavy and irreversible. Emily looked down at Rex, at the scars that crossed his fur, at the slow rise and fall of his chest, and felt a hollow ache settle deep inside her. Outside, thunder rolled somewhere far away, a distant growl across the Georgia sky, and though she couldn't name it yet, something inside her whispered that the storm wasn't over. Not even close. It was late October when Emily Carter returned home. The leaves had begun to turn, gold, amber, rust, and the Georgia sun had lost its warmth. The air carried the faint scent of burning wood and the hollow quiet that always follows tragedy. The town looked the same, yet nothing felt familiar. The once friendly faces of neighbors were now guarded, eyes lingering on Emily's wheelchair before darting away, guilty and uncertain. Some waved weakly from porches, others pretended not to see her at all. The laughter that used to fill the streets had vanished, replaced by silence, the kind that made even the wind sound intrusive. Rex sat beside her in the back seat of her father's truck, his bandages mostly gone now, though his fur still bore the faint scars of fire and steel. He no longer bounded with puppyish energy. Each movement was careful, deliberate, as if he understood the fragility of life now. His eyes, though, remained the same, deep, loyal, and impossibly human. As they drove past the school, Emily turned her head away. The shattered windows had been replaced, the yellow police tape gone, but she could still see it. The chaos, the screams, the moment the world had ended. She pressed her hand against Rex's back for comfort. "You're safe now," her father said quietly from the driver's seat. His voice carried the weight of someone trying to convince himself as much as her. "I know," she murmured. But even she didn't believe it. When they reached the farmhouse, the sight of home should have been comforting. The white paint, the porch swing, the smell of pine from the woods behind the barn. But the house felt smaller now, lonelier. Like the air itself had been holding its breath since she left. Rex limped beside her as she rolled up the ramp, times 100 moms. Every step he took made her heart ache, a reminder of the price he had paid. Inside, her mother had left everything just as it was. Emily's books stacked by the window, Rex's food bowl polished clean, his favorite blanket folded neatly on the couch. For a moment, it almost felt like the world had stood still waiting for them. But then she looked at the small dent in the wall by the doorframe, Rex's old scratch marks from when he used to jump excitedly to greet her. That was before everything changed. That night, after dinner, Emily sat on the porch, wrapped in a quilt. The cicadas were gone now, replaced by the distant howl of coyotes. The moon hung low and yellow above the tree line. She could hear the faint rumble of a truck passing somewhere down the county road, and beyond that, silence. The sheriff's mansion glowed faintly on the hill across the valley, a beacon of wealth and authority standing defiantly against the night. Its lights never went out anymore. The curtains were always drawn tight, and though no one said it aloud, everyone in town knew that the man inside had become a ghost, alive but haunted. Emily's father joined her quietly, settling into the old rocking chair beside her. "Whole town's walking on eggshells," he muttered, eyes fixed on that glowing house. "They don't trust the sheriff. They don't trust anyone wearing a badge anymore." She didn't answer. She just watched the lights flicker faintly through the trees. Rex rested at her feet, his head heavy on her lap. The wind brushed through his fur, carrying the scent of pine, damp soil, and something else, something sharp. He stirred, lifting his head. His ears twitched. "What is it?" Emily whispered, scratching behind his ear. Rex didn't respond. He stood slowly, sniffing the air with intent, muscles tightening beneath his scarred skin. Then, without warning, he stepped off the porch. "Rex?" He turned once, eyes catching the light, the look of a creature pulled by something larger than instinct. Then he began to walk. Emily's father rose. "Where's he going?" She shook her head, heart pounding. "I don't know." Rex limped down the dirt road, his gait uneven but determined. The moonlight painted him in silver, a ghost of his former strength. Emily called his name again, but he didn't stop. He moved like he was following a scent, one that only he could sense. The path led him past the edge of the woods, down toward the old gravel road that curved toward the sheriff's estate. When he reached the fence line, he stopped. The house loomed in the distance, tall, proud, sterile. The porch light burned like an unblinking eye, and then it began. At first, it was just a low growl, deep, trembling, full of grief. Then it grew louder, shaping itself into a bark that carried through the cold night air. One bark, then another, then another. Each sound echoed across the valley, bouncing off the trees and fences until the whole town could hear it. A sound too raw to be mistaken for mere noise. Emily's father froze beside her. "He's barking at the sheriff's house," he whispered. Emily's throat tightened. "Why?" The barks turned mournful, almost human. It was as if Rex wasn't warning or threatening. He was remembering, crying, condemning. Every sound seemed to claw at the walls of that mansion, scraping away at the silence the sheriff had built to hide behind. Inside the house, a light flickered on upstairs. Shadow moved past the window. Rex kept barking. His voice cracked, his body trembling, but he didn't stop. There was something terrifyingly beautiful about it. This broken creature refusing to be silent. Every bark was a wound reopening, a truth that refused to stay buried. Finally, her father stepped forward. "Come on, boy," he called softly. "That's enough." But Rex didn't move. He stood there under the moonlight, his silhouette small against the vast darkness, and barked until his throat gave out. When he finally turned back toward home, his breath came in ragged gasps. Emily met him halfway down the road, tears blurring her vision as she reached out to him. "Why, Rex?" she whispered, her hands shaking as she touched his face. "Why there?" Rex pressed his muzzle into her palm, warm, steady, unyielding, as if to say, "Because the truth doesn't die just because people stop speaking it." In the distance, the lights in the sheriff's mansion went out. The valley fell silent again. But that silence was no longer peaceful. It was haunted. Sleep had become a stranger to Sheriff Daniel Thompson. Each night, when the world outside his mansion sank into silence, that sound returned. Faint at first, like a ghost calling from the valley below. Then louder, closer. A voice that pierced through the walls of his perfect home. Bark, bark, bark. The first time he thought it was a stray. By the third night, he knew Rex, that same German shepherd, the one that had survived, the one that refused to die quietly, the dog whose loyalty had exposed his sin. The sound echoed through the dark hills like an accusation, bouncing off the pine trees, rattling the windows of the sheriff's once proud home. Each bark felt heavier than the last, a sound not of rage but of remembrance. And each time it came, Daniel woke with a jolt, heart pounding, sweat slick on his neck, hands trembling around the edges of his blanket. He would stare out the window, watching the beam of his porch light tremble against the rain-soaked road below. And there he was, Rex, limping, soaked, standing before the iron gate like a sentinel carved from grief and loyalty. His chest heaved, his fur glistening under the mist, and his eyes, those unrelenting eyes, fixed on the man inside. The first few nights, Daniel tried to ignore it. He turned up the television, poured another drink, told himself it was just an animal acting on instinct. But no amount of noise could drown that sound, because every bark dragged something else out of the shadows. The memory of his son, sitting in the interrogation room, wrists cuffed, eyes red and terrified. "Dad, please," Kyle had whispered that day, his voice cracking. "I didn't mean to, "I know," Daniel had said, forcing his voice to stay steady, even as his hands shook. "I'll take care of it." But he hadn't taken care of it. Not really. He'd buried it. Buried the truth, the guilt, the horror. And now it was digging its way back up, one bark at a time. By the second week, everyone in town had heard the rumors. "The Carter girl's dog goes there every night," whispered Mrs. Jenkins, the bus driver. "Just sits by the gate and barks, won't move till dawn." Some said it was loyalty. Others said it was revenge. But the whispers carried a chill when they reached the diner or the church pews on Sunday morning. "That dog knows," an old farmer muttered one morning, shaking his head. "He knows something we don't." The sheriff heard those words too. They spread like wildfire, seeping into every corner of his shrinking world. Officers stopped meeting his eyes. Old friends crossed the street to avoid him. And every night, without fail, that sound came again. Bark, 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 like a tolling bell, like a reminder that the dead don't rest easy when truth is buried alive. On the 12th night, rain came, thick and cold, drenching the world in silver. Emily couldn't sleep. She sat by her window, staring at the blurred outline of the sheriff's hill, listening to the faint sound drifting through the storm. Rex was gone again. Her father had warned her to let him be. "He's got something to finish, Em." But she couldn't. Not tonight. Not when the thunder rolled like war drums in the distance. Grabbing her raincoat, she slipped into the darkness. The mud clung to her wheels, the cold biting at her hands, but she kept going. The barking grew louder with every turn of her chair, until finally she saw him, a shadow at the gate, illuminated by lightning. "Rex!" she cried, her voice nearly swallowed by the storm. He didn't turn. His body trembled from exhaustion, but he stood firm, head raised, throat raw, every bark ripping from him like it cost a piece of his soul. Emily's breath caught. She wheeled closer, rain streaming down her face like tears she couldn't stop. "Please, boy, stop. You're hurting yourself." She reached him just as his bark cracked into a rasping cough. His fur was matted, his eyes red from rain and fatigue. She touched his face and he leaned into her hand, still trembling, still staring past her, toward the house. The front door opened. Light spilled across the wet driveway, and out stepped the sheriff, bareheaded, rain slicking his hair to his forehead. In his right hand, a pistol glinted under the porch light. His shoulders sagged, his face a ruin of sleepless nights and guilt. He stood there, watching the girl and the dog through the sheets of rain. For a moment, no one moved. The world held its breath. Then Rex barked again, hoarse, broken, but defiant. The sheriff flinched. His hand trembled around the gun. He took one step forward, then another, until he was close enough to see the fire still burning in those animal eyes. "Stop it," he muttered, his voice cracking. "Please, stop." But Rex wouldn't. He barked once more, a sound soaked in every ounce of pain and loyalty left in him. The sheriff raised the gun. Emily gasped. "Don't!" she cried, her voice shattering through the storm. Daniel froze. The barrel trembled in his grip. He looked from the dog to the girl, his face collapsing under the weight of everything he'd done, every lie, every choice. And then slowly, his knees gave out. He fell to the wet gravel, the gun slipping from his hand, clattering uselessly beside him. His head dropped into his hands, shoulders shaking as the rain beat down. "I hear them too," he whispered, voice hollow, broken. "Every night, I hear them too." Emily sat motionless, the words sinking deep into her chest. The storm seemed to pause around them, wind dying, thunder retreating, as if the world itself was listening. Rex took one step forward, then another, until he stood before the man who had tried to silence the truth. He didn't bark again. He just looked at him, unblinking, unwavering, the living embodiment of judgment and grace. The sheriff raised his eyes slowly, meeting that gaze, and for the first time since the shooting, he began to cry. Not the tears of a man mourning his son, but those of a man mourning his soul. Emily reached out to Rex, her voice trembling. "Come on, boy, let's go home." Rex hesitated, his eyes never leaving the sheriff. Then he turned, limping back toward her, each step heavy but certain. Behind them, the sheriff stayed on his knees in the rain, whispering something into his shaking hands, words only the storm could hear. The thunder rolled again, softer this time, almost like a sigh. And as Emily and Rex disappeared down the dark road, the first light of dawn began to break through the clouds, painting the wet ground in a fragile gold. But for Daniel Thompson, the night was far from over. Because guilt doesn't fade with sunrise, and some barks, no matter how far away, never stop echoing. The days that followed blurred into one long, sleepless stretch of guilt. For Sheriff Daniel Thompson, time no longer moved forward. It folded in on itself, looping endlessly between memory and regret. The mansion that had once been his fortress now felt like a tomb, its walls whispering every secret he'd tried to bury. Each night, he sat at the head of his dinner table, untouched food before him, and watched the chair across the table, the one that had belonged to his son. The silence there was unbearable. Sometimes, he thought he heard Kyle's voice, a boyish laugh from the hallway, a faint "Dad?" echoing from upstairs. But when he looked, there was only the stillness. At first, he tried to drown it out. He turned on the TV, poured himself whiskey, turned the volume up until the walls shook. But guilt doesn't fade under noise. It grows louder. And every time he caught his reflection, in the mirror, in the dark window glass, he didn't see a sheriff anymore. He saw a coward, a father who'd betrayed the oath he'd built his life upon, a man who had chosen silence over truth. The nightmares came next. In them, he stood in the school hallway, surrounded by shattered glass and the smell of gunpowder. The walls pulsed with the sound of heartbeats, his son's, the victim's, his own. And through the smoke came Rex, the German shepherd, his fur streaked with blood, eyes burning with something beyond life or death. In the dream, Rex never attacked. He just watched, silent, still, unforgiving. Every night Daniel woke gasping, clutching his chest, the echo of barking still ringing in his ears. And then, one evening, it wasn't a dream. He looked out the window, and there, through the iron gate, sat Rex. The same dog, older now, thinner, but unbroken. The rain had stopped hours ago, yet his fur was still damp, glistening under the amber porch light. He didn't bark. He didn't move. He simply sat there, eyes fixed on the sheriff, as if waiting for something. Not vengeance, not violence, but truth. Daniel stared back for a long time, the world outside silent, but for the faint rustle of wind through the trees. Something inside him cracked. He walked to the door, opened it, and stepped out into the cool night air. The gravel crunched beneath his boots. For the first time in months, he didn't carry his badge or his gun, only the weight of his sins. As he reached the gate, Rex lifted his head slightly, but did not move away. The sheriff stopped a few feet short and sank to his knees. His breath trembled in the cold. His eyes filled before the first word even left his mouth. "You're right," he whispered, voice breaking. "I know what I did." Rex tilted his head, quiet, listening. "I told myself I did it for my son," Daniel said, his words spilling into the dark. "That I was protecting him, that I was being a father, but I wasn't. I was protecting myself, my name, my image." He rubbed a trembling hand over his face, tears mixing with rain. "And all it did was make the pain worse. I see them every night. The faces of those kids, that little girl in the wheelchair, and you." Rex blinked slowly, his chest rising and falling in calm rhythm. Daniel's voice fell to a whisper. "You saved her, didn't you? You did what I couldn't." He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. His hands shook as he hit the record button. For a long moment, he said nothing, staring into the camera lens as if it were a mirror. Then he began. "My name is Daniel Thompson, Sheriff of Brookdale County. I am the father of Kyle Thompson, the shooter, responsible for the tragedy at Brookdale High. And I have lied. I've covered evidence, paid off families, silenced my own officers, all to protect a name that doesn't deserve protection." His voice cracked, and he glanced back at Rex, who still hadn't moved. "I can't live like this anymore. The truth deserves to breathe, even if it kills what's left of me." He stopped the recording, stared at it for a moment, then pressed send, forwarding it to the local news desk, the district attorney, the state bureau. And then, in the heavy quiet that followed, Daniel Thompson placed his badge on the ground between him and the dog. The sound of it hitting the gravel, small, metallic, final, echoed louder than any gunshot ever could. Rex stood slowly, his body trembling from age and old wounds. He took one step forward, then another, until he was close enough that Daniel could feel his breath. For a heartbeat, man and dog simply looked at each other. Not enemies, not symbols. Just two broken souls caught in the same storm. Then Rex turned and walked away into the night. Daniel stayed where he was, head bowed, tears soaking into the dirt. The next morning, the town woke to the sound of sirens, but not the kind that signal tragedy. News vans crowded the sheriff's office, their cameras capturing the same loop. Daniel Thompson, hands cuffed, being led away by his own deputies. No words, no resistance, just a man surrendering to what he'd spent months running from. At the Carter farmhouse, the TV flickered in the corner of the living room. Emily sat in her wheelchair, a blanket draped over her knees. Rex lay beside her, his head resting on her lap, eyes half closed but alert. Her father stood behind her, arms crossed, silent. On the screen, a reporter's voice broke through the static. "Sheriff Daniel Thompson has confessed to obstructing justice and covering evidence in connection with the Brookdale High tragedy. In his recorded statement, he expressed remorse and claimed full responsibility for the attempted cover-up." The footage cut to Daniel's face, hollow-eyed, exhausted, but strangely peaceful. Emily's throat tightened. "He finally told the truth," she whispered. Her father nodded slowly. "Yeah, he did." For a moment, they both just watched the screen in silence. No anger, no triumph, just quiet understanding that nothing could undo what was lost. But at least now, the truth had a name. Emily reached down and brushed her fingers through Rex's fur. "You did it, boy," she said softly. "You made him remember." Rex looked up at her, his tail thumping once against the floor, faint, steady, like a heartbeat that refused to fade. Outside, the morning sun broke over the valley, washing away the last of the night's shadows, and for the first time in a long, long while, the town breathed. Spring had come back to Georgia, gentle and forgiving. The sun was warm again, and the air smelled of wildflowers and new beginnings. Grass covered what had once been broken ground. Trees that had stood bare through the long winter now swayed with tender leaves. The world, it seemed, had chosen to heal. At the edge of town, Brookdale High stood once more, rebuilt, repainted, reborn. The hallways gleamed with fresh paint, the windows clear of scars. But for those who had lived through that September morning, no amount of new walls could erase the old echoes. Today, the community gathered on the school lawn for the unveiling of a statue. The students, the teachers, the parents, faces both familiar and changed by grief, filled the space with a quiet reverence. There was no music, no applause, just the sound of the spring breeze whispering through the grass. At the front, under the great oak tree that had somehow survived the tragedy, Emily Carter sat in her wheelchair, Rex lying beside her. He was slower now. His once shining coat had dulled, streaked with gray along the muzzle. Each breath came with a small tremor, and the deep, steady eyes that had once scanned every shadow now blinked slowly in the bright sunlight. Still, he sat tall, chest out, proud, as if even the weight of time couldn't steal the dignity from him. Emily adjusted the small bandana around his neck, faded from too many washes. "You ready for this, partner?" she whispered, running her fingers through his fur. Rex's tail gave one faint wag. A hush fell over the crowd as the mayor stepped to the microphone. His voice was soft, but carried through the open air. "Today," he began, "we remember the lives we lost, the courage we witnessed, and the light that guided us through darkness." He gestured toward the draped monument behind him, the one the community had waited months to see. "And we honor a hero who reminded us that loyalty, courage, and love can come from the most unexpected places." With a single pull of the cord, the white cloth fell away. Gasps spread through the crowd. There, cast in bronze, stood a German shepherd, noble and unflinching, eyes lifted toward the horizon. Beneath its paws, etched into the marble base, were wings unfurled like a guardian angel. The plaque read, "Rex, the silent protector. He gave his all so others could live." For a long moment, no one moved. The only sound was the rustle of leaves in the oak above, and somewhere, faintly, the cry of a mourning dove. Then, one by one, children began to step forward, clutching flowers in small, trembling hands. Daisies, lilies, wild roses. They laid them gently at the base of the statue. Some whispered thank yous. Others just stood quietly, eyes glistening. Emily watched, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Every breath she took trembled with emotion she couldn't contain. Pride, sorrow, love, all of it intertwined in the same fragile heartbeat. When her turn came, she rolled forward, Rex moving beside her, slow but steady. The crowd parted, silent, watching as the girl and her dog, the two who had survived, came to stand before their own monument. Emily placed a single white rose at the statue's base. Her voice was barely a whisper. "You did it, boy," she said. "You really did." Rex looked up at the statue, his ears twitching as if he recognized the familiar silhouette. Then he lowered himself to the grass, stretching out beneath the real oak tree that had shaded them for years. The sunlight flickered through the branches, dappling his fur in gold. Emily reached down, stroking his head. "You can rest now," she whispered. "It's okay." He let out a small sigh, his eyes half closed, his breathing slow and rhythmic, the kind of peace that only comes after a long fight. Around them, the ceremony faded. People drifted away in twos and threes, speaking softly, unwilling to disturb the quiet miracle happening beneath that tree. The world seemed to slow, holding its breath one last time. The wind shifted. A gentle breeze swept through the field, carrying the scent of rain-soaked earth and fresh blossoms. The petals from the flowers at the statue's base fluttered up, spinning softly in the air like confetti made of memory. Rex's ear twitched. His eyes fluttered open for a moment, meeting Emily's. In that look was everything words could never capture. Gratitude, love, goodbye. Then, from deep in his chest, came one final bark. Soft, hoarse, but clear. It wasn't a cry of pain. It was a promise. A farewell wrapped in courage. A sound that carried across the schoolyard, through the crowd, into the trees, and far beyond the valley. Emily froze, her hand pressed against his neck, feeling the faint pulse beneath her fingertips. And then, as the wind brushed through his fur one last time, the world went still. No sound, no movement. Just quiet. She sat there for a long while, tears streaming silently down her cheeks, her hand still resting on the friend who had once stood between her and death itself. When her father approached, he didn't speak. He simply knelt beside her, his own eyes red, and laid a hand on Rex's shoulder. Together, they stayed there, a soldier, a daughter, and the dog who had taught them both what true courage looked like. Finally, Emily lifted her face toward the sunlight. Through her tears, she smiled, faint, trembling, but real. Some heroes wear badges, she whispered. Others just wear fur. Her father closed his eyes, and for the first time in months, peace settled over them like the warmth of the afternoon sun. Above them, the new bronze Rex gleamed in the light, wings spread, head high, forever watching over the school he'd once protected. The wind stirred again, rustling the leaves of the oak. For a heartbeat, it almost sounded like a bark echoing through the distance, soft, eternal, carried by the spring air. And somewhere in that sound, Emily heard it, the promise he'd kept. That love once given never really dies. Sometimes, stories like Rex's remind us that love doesn't always speak in words. Sometimes, it barks. It waits by the gate. It gives everything it has without asking for anything in return. That's what makes dogs, especially German shepherds, so extraordinary. Their loyalty isn't taught. It's born from the kind of heart that stays true, no matter the cost. If you've ever looked into your dog's eyes and felt that quiet understanding, that wordless bond, you already know what I mean. These animals don't just live with us. They live for us. They teach us courage, patience, and what it really means to be present. If this story touched you, maybe take a moment to explore ways to deepen that connection with your own dog. There's a wonderful resource that helps people understand their dogs on a whole new level. Not training, not commands, just understanding. You can check it out whenever you feel ready. Because at the end of the day, our dogs don't need perfection. They just need us to love them back, the way they've loved us all along.